Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, if you allow me, my first words will go to our fellow citizens in the Canary Islands to express our solidarity and also the commitment of the entire civil protection system to the storm they are suffering these last hours. And with that desire also to express the great paradox of seeing how the world, and also its political representatives, among them ourselves, we have to look forward to talking about war, peace, and not so much about common challenges as it is the one of the climate emergency and its effects on the security and lives of our fellow citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, there are dates that are not forgotten. There are dates that are not forgotten, that remain marked forever, and they also do so in the collective memory of a country. In my opinion, February 15th, 2003 was one of them. That Saturday, more than 3 million citizens went out to demonstrate throughout Spain with a simple and resounding message: not to war. Like many other fellow citizens, I was one of them. I lived at the foot of the street the pride and the courage of a society, the Spanish society, which refused to renounce its principles just to please an American president. Which refused to support a lie that only pursued making richer the rich and more miserable the already poor. The surveys of those days were very clear. They were very forceful, ladies and gentlemen. Less than 6% of the Spaniards wanted Spain to join the conflict, and the then president of the government, José María Aznar, was perfectly aware of this. But he didn't care. He dragged us into this madness anyway, because he wanted to feel important. Because he wanted, ladies and gentlemen, silence. Because he wanted to feel important. Because he wanted the then President of the United States, George Bush, to invite a priest and put his feet on the table. A war in exchange for ego. The dignity of an entire country in exchange for that photo. What came next? We know it well because it is already part of history. The biggest geopolitical disaster in the world since the Vietnam War. Ladies and gentlemen of the Popular Party and Vox, who are already interacting, and I thank you in addition. Do you know how many victims the Iraq War left? Do you know? Do you know what caused that illegal war in the Middle East and the rest of the world? You don't know because you don't want to know, and because it's also a shame. But I think it's important that we remember it, because forgetting is the first step to make the same mistake. More than 300,000 people died. More than 300,000 people. Many of them children, girls, and women. There were more than 5 million displaced people who had to leave their homes. The country logically ended in ruins, a torrent of instability that spread throughout the region. The Iraq War, by the way, precipitated the war in Syria, galvanized al-Qaeda, stimulated the creation of Daesh, the so-called Islamic State. And paradoxes of history, ladies and gentlemen, paradoxes of history greatly reinforced the Iranian regime of the Ayatollahs through the so-called growing Shiite fertile. In Europe, this war, the war of, among others, Aznar, caused tensions between the member states. You will remember the old and the new Europe, depending on whether it was aligned with international law or not. It also caused a substantial increase in the prices of fuels and also of the purchase basket. The migratory crisis was unprecedented in the Mediterranean, with jihadist attacks in Paris, London, Brussels, Barcelona, and Madrid. In them, ladies and gentlemen, more than 150 Spanish compatriots died. That was what happened, ladies and gentlemen of Vox, and ladies and gentlemen of the Popular Party. That was what happened, Mr. Feijóo. And yet, Mr. Feijóo dared last week to insinuate that if a new wave of attacks occurs in Europe, it will be the fault of the regularization of migrants carried out by the Spanish government. What cynicism and what lack of respect for the victims. Because death, instability, the humanitarian crisis, the erosion of the living conditions of millions of citizens in Europe, Spain, and around the world, and the current equivalent to 1,900 million euros of military spending, was the result of the Iraq War all over the world, and in Spain. That was the gift of the Azores trio with their illegal war. Over the years, some of the promoters of the illegal war in Iraq changed their position. Former President George Bush apologized for that illegal war. The British Prime Minister apologized for that illegal war. And what did former President Aznar say? That he does not regret anything and that he will never do it again. That is the moral catchphrase of former President José María Aznar. It is important to remember, not to forget, so as not to make the mistakes that were made in the past. And unfortunately, history repeats itself. But this time, not as a farce, but as a tragedy. Because Aznar has been replaced by Mr. Fijo and Mr. Abascal. And Bush has been replaced by Donald Trump. And instead of Iraq, we have Iran. By the way, Iran, ladies and gentlemen, is a country twice as populated as Iraq, and with a global economic burden 5 times greater. A country that has more regular soldiers, ladies and gentlemen, than Germany, than France, and than Italy together. That is the military force that Iran has. With very advanced technologies, as we are seeing, capable of destroying planes in mid-flight, launch ballistic missiles at 4,000 kilometers away, control the Strait of Hormuz despite the presence of the American fleet. In short, Iran is a military power. And by the way, it has been preparing for a war like this for 40 years. What I want to tell you with all this is that we are not facing the same scenario as in the illegal war in Iraq. We are in something much worse, with a much broader and much deeper potential of impact. And it is also convenient to remember, ladies and gentlemen, how we have come to this situation. The people who are following us through the media, through social networks, must remember that on June 22nd of last year, while Israel was destroying Gaza, the United States bombed the military complexes of Iran, Fordo, Isfahan, and also Natanz. Because, according to them, the regime of the Ayatollahs was, and I quote textually, very close to enriching enough uranium to build nuclear warheads. And that, on the same day of the attack, the President of the United States assured in a televised speech that those infrastructures had been, and I quote textually, complete and totally destroyed. Although several technical reports questioned that information. People also have to know that, in addition to that day, there was another one on February 6th of this year. Always according to the information of accredited international and national media, where it was said that there were delegations from the United States and Iran that were negotiating. They did it for several weeks, according to the media, first in Oman and secondly in Geneva. And after many doubts, it seems, according to those reports, that Iran ended up agreeing to sign a new nuclear agreement. By the way, a substantially better agreement than that of former President Obama when he achieved it in 2015, in which, among other things, Iran came to destroy the bulk of its enriched uranium and to restore the supervision of the International Atomic Energy Organization. People, therefore, have to know that, according to all the information, the U.S. administration had that proposal in its hands and that it rejected it without giving explanations. And that exactly 2 days later, on February 28th, it began to bomb Tehran, together with the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu, without warning his allies, without legal support, and without a defined objective. One moment, Mr. President. Members of Parliament, please. A little silence. Mr. Hernando, I call you to order for the first time because you don't stop talking all the time. You don't stop talking all the time, Mr. Hernando. If you don't want to listen, you can leave the room, but don't bother. The White House affirmed, ladies and gentlemen, that they did it because Iran was 2 weeks away from taking and having the nuclear weapon. But several senior officials of the U.S. agencies and security departments have publicly stated, and I quote, that in this country, and I quote, there was no structured program to manufacture nuclear weapons. And that, therefore, I quote again, Iran did not present an imminent threat to the West. Despite this, the bombs fell. They continue to do so while we speak, ladies and gentlemen, with an intensity that, according to the figures handled by the Pentagon, doubles that which was deployed during the Iraq War. The bombs have already reached more than 3,000 strategic objectives, including military bases, government centers, ports, but also, unfortunately, it has destroyed more than 40,000 homes, hospitals, airports, schools, energy infrastructures, for example, that of South Sparks, that of Ras Laffan, that of Ninar, in which nothing more and nothing less than 20% of the world's liquefied gas is produced. Refineries, all of them, which, as those countries that have suffered from it have rightly said, will take years to rebuild. And therefore, the question that we should ask ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, and I believe that it is legitimately done by most citizens, is what is all this destruction for? What consequences has this first month of war had? And I believe that the data is very eloquent, because there have already been almost 2,000 confirmed deaths, and there are probably 1,000 or thousands unconfirmed. More than 4 million people displaced in Iran and Lebanon. A brave Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, whose goal is to repeat in Lebanon the same destruction and the same suffering that he committed in Gaza. A response from the Iranian regime, cruel and illegal, to its neighboring countries, which, of course, we condemn and reject, because one illegality cannot be answered with another illegality. About 12 billion euros, or dollars rather, of public money spent on military operations. A severe contraction of tourism, maritime trade, and world air traffic. A drastic increase in the price of hydrocarbons, fertilizers, helium, essential raw materials for the proper functioning of the world economy, and also for the food security of millions of people. And here in our country, diesel and gas have risen by 35% and 95%, respectively. The IBEX 35, to quote only this example, has accumulated a fall of 9%, which means that Spanish companies, in just 1 month of conflict, have lost more than 100 billion euros in less than a month. Almost 5 billion euros for each day of this conflict, of this illegal war. And therefore, all this for what? What have the promoters of this illegal war achieved? In my opinion, they have achieved the following. First, undermine international legality, destabilize the Middle East, revitalize conflicts in Iraq and Lebanon, bury Gaza under rubble, but not this time under the rubble of concrete, but of oblivion and indifference. Bring insecurity to Gulf countries, which were countries safe until just under a month ago. Encourage, as we saw yesterday, the nuclear programs of Pakistan and North Korea. Give Putin more than 8 billion euros to finance his war and his invasion in Ukraine, thanks to the increase in the price of fuel and the lifting of the sanctions also produced by the U.S. administration. Worsen the energy and logistical difficulties of the people and the Ukrainian army, as we had the opportunity to share with President Zelensky just over 10 days ago. And in Iran, in Tehran, change one Khamenei for another Khamenei even worse, because Mojtaba is an equal dictatorial leader and even more bloodthirsty than his father. And besides, unlike him, he is in favor of Iran developing nuclear weapons. In short, this is an absolute disaster. That is what the promoters of this war have achieved to date. And that is what, in my opinion, their ladies from the Popular Party and Vox have contributed with their support or with their silence. Because citizens must be clear about one thing, and that is that to be silent about an unfair and illegal war is not prudence or loyalty. It is an act of cowardice and complicity. Meanwhile, what has the Spanish government done? Well, we have worked tirelessly on 5 fronts that I would like to share with all of you. First, as you know, we have denied the US the use of the Rota and Moron base for this illegal war. All the flight plans that contemplated actions related to the operation in Iran have been rejected. All of them, including the refueling planes. It has not been easy, but I think we have done it because, among other things, the bilateral agreement that manages these bases allows it, and because we are a sovereign country that does not want to participate in illegal wars. Secondly, we have proceeded to the most important evacuation in the history of Spain. We have evacuated 8,000 Spaniards who were trapped in Iran, in the Gulf countries. Thirdly, we have sent humanitarian aid to several affected countries, such as Lebanon. We have strengthened the defense of European territory in Cyprus with the shipment of our most advanced frigate to the eastern Mediterranean. Thirdly, as we did at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the government has approved a response plan to the Middle East war, raising with it, so far, the largest social shield of the whole of the European Union. The largest. A social shield endowed with 5 billion euros in direct aid to the affected sectors, with tax exemptions, brave policies to protect our 20 million homes, 3 million companies from the adverse consequences of this war. Because, evidently, ladies and gentlemen, every bomb that falls in the Middle East ends up hitting, and we are already seeing it, the pockets of our families. Ladies and gentlemen, this government, since I have the honor of presiding over it, has faced unprecedented crises. Unprecedented crises of which we have come out, I believe, reinforced as a society. And I have said it many times before you, and also before the citizens. We do not choose crises, but we do how to solve and face these crises. And we do it with more protection, and not less. And the economic data, by the way, endorse the success of this economic policy of combining protection with transformation, particularly in the energy sector, where, indeed, betting on indigenous energies makes us more resilient when it comes to facing these energy shocks that come from outside. To the pandemic, ladies and gentlemen, we responded with ERTEs and with European funds. Faced with the cuts, the increases in taxes indiscriminate to the middle class, and the rescues to the bank, which promoted the rights when they ruled during the financial crisis. To the war in Ukraine, we responded with the Iberian solution. With an unprecedented mobilization of resources worth 25 billion euros, which allowed us to be one of the first European countries to recover the 2% inflation path. With an economic growth that exceeds, with increases, the European average, and tripling nothing more and nothing less than the first economy in the world in 2025, the United States, in employment creation. To the trade war, unilaterally opened by the United States against Europe and against the world, we responded with grants and with aid worth 15 billion euros, opening new markets to our companies. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I repeat, we did not choose the crises, but we did know how to get out of them. Protecting people, not leaving anyone behind. And this is also the logic of the Iran war response plan, which I hope can be validated tomorrow by your ladies and gentlemen. Why do I say this? I say it because it is also important that citizens, before referring to the Iraq war, are aware of the importance of having governments committed to the people on foot. I say it because during the Iraq war, the government of then-President Aznar did nothing, absolutely nothing. Mr. Montoro, then Minister of Finance, did not approve a single tax cut. 0 reforms, 0 aid. It can be seen that he was too busy getting rich and trafficking with the state's official bulletin to worry about the war. And yet, of course, we are going to hear today a retail of proposals, of tax cuts on the part of the opposition. In short, giving lessons. What a tough face. We have gotten involved. In fact, in addition to building the largest social shield of the European Union, we have promoted several measures to accelerate our energy transition even more. That has been our 4th pillar or axis of action. Because if something has shown this crisis, or the crises caused by the wars in Ukraine, in Iran, it is that the less we depend on gas and oil, the more autonomous we will be as a country, and the more resilient we will be to energy shocks like the ones we are suffering. In 5th and last place, what the government has done is to deploy an intense diplomatic activity to stop this war. We were the first to raise our voices in the Council of Foreign Affairs of the European Union. The first. We have talked with all the leaders of about 30 strategic countries. We have made the entire European Union move. And we have done it because we are convinced that international law, multilateralism, and diplomacy are the best tools that exist to stop the war and promote peace. Ladies and gentlemen, and I want to refer expressly to the citizens who are watching this conference, because the question is, what is going to happen from now on? Well, honestly, nobody knows. And that is the great misfortune that only one person knows. It is possible that diplomatic and financial pressure will take effect and precipitate a cessation of hostilities. It is possible. But it is also possible that the escalation continues, that the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, that there is a deployment of troops, as we have seen today, and confrontations on the ground, that the war continues for a day, months, years. This disaster in Iran may happen soon, or the nightmare in Iraq may be repeated, but this time multiplied by N. And that the world, Europe, and therefore Spain, suffer the economic consequences, the humanitarian drama, the security crisis, even greater than the one suffered in 2003 with the Iraq War. Evidently, what I can transfer to the citizens, and also to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that the Spanish government is going to work so that this does not happen. I insist, nobody knows. What we can be sure of is that from this conflict, there will be no higher salaries, no more affordable housing, no better public services. And this is the real tragedy. This is the real tragedy. Because the last thing the world needed was another war. And on this occasion, an illegal, absurd, cruel war that takes us away from our social, economic, and environmental objectives. That takes us away from the priorities of the people. And only with a purpose, with a goal. And it is to feed the interests of a few, of those of always, of those above. That is why, since the first day, the position of the progressive coalition government has been clear. And I also anticipate that, unlike others, we are not going to change it. We say no to the unilateral rupture of international law. We say no to repeating the mistakes of the past. We say no to dressing up as democracy what is actually greed and political calculation. In short, we say no to war, and even no to the war that was created together with our parents and grandparents 23 years ago, millions and millions of young people. The same no that we announced hours after the first bombs fell on Iran. And that has then led, in short, that expansion of the conflict to other latitudes, also from the Middle East. Because, ladies and gentlemen, the international order based on rules is not something that one can invoke or violate according to their convenience. Because coherence, consistency, is a fundamental pillar of that international law. More than the headquarters of the United Nations or the submarines of NATO, the most important thing is to be coherent and consistent in the defense of international order and international law. Because what we cannot do is condemn the invasion of Ukraine, as most of the Spanish citizenship and also the Spanish government and most of these parliamentary groups do, and applaud the attacks of Iran. We cannot demand that the territorial integrity of Greenland be respected and shut up when this territorial integrity is run over in Gaza or Lebanon. Ladies and gentlemen of the Popular Party and Vox, because I believe that even the vast majority of citizens vote who they vote, I agree with what I am going to say next. The double standards do not create a fairer world, but a more insecure world. Patriotism is opposing an illegal war that in no way benefits the interests of the Spaniards or the Europeans. Spain today, fortunately, is an international reference in defense of peace and international law. And in an uncertain world, and, by the way, lacking empathy, I have to tell you that being Spanish is a pride. Therefore, let's follow that path that I think is the only possible and the only desired by the vast majority of Spaniards, that of law and peace, with humility, but also with determination and conviction. We are going to demand that this war stop, because it is not fair that one is ignited in the world and the others have to swallow their ashes. It is not fair that the Spaniards and the rest of the Europeans have to pay the bill of this illegal war out of their own pockets. It is not fair that countries with fewer resources than the West, I think of Africa, I think of Latin America, are going to suffer the terrible consequences of this outrage. It is not fair that for a few to get away, the social majority has to give up their projects or get worse at the end of the month. And since it is not fair, we are not going to tolerate it. And some will find this naive. But the naive thing is to think that international justice defends itself by tolerating the atrocities. The naive thing is to think that the great powers are going to respect the rules if the medium powers are left with our arms crossed without doing absolutely anything. Ladies and gentlemen, the Spain that remained silent in the back seat while other powers demanded and led the world no longer exists. Now we have voice and vote. And this is important. And we are going to use it for the benefit of the general interest of Spain and for the benefit of humanity. Because there has been a lot of talk over the last 25 days. What does it mean to be an ally of another country? What does it mean to be a friend of another country? In my opinion, being an ally or a friend of another country does not mean obedience or blind seguidism. Being an ally or a friend of another country means loyalty to some principles that we share or supposedly share. It means having the courage to stand up when the path is the wrong one. It means telling your friend, your partner, the truth, even if this truth is uncomfortable. And the truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that this war is an immense mistake whose humanitarian, moral, economic, and security cost we do not accept, nor are we willing to pay. I want to finish by addressing the Spaniards to tell them that Spain will not be an accomplice, neither of illegal aggressions nor of lies disguised as freedom. Not this time. Not while I am president of the government. Thank you very much.